Welcome to today's webcast. I am so excited to share with you some recent research from ITA Group that's exploring the emotional impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on employees. We'll kick today off by walking through what our hope was for this research when we initiated it from the very beginning, as well as what our methodology was before we kind of dig into the details of what we heard from the workers we surveyed and how their feedback can help organizations and leaders like you better understand how you can support your people during this unprecedented time. But before we dig in, I wanted to share just a little bit more information about myself. My name is Christina Zurich, and I'm an Insights and Strategy Leader with ITA Group. It's an engagement agency that develops custom tailored solutions that align, motivate, and recognize employees. And in my role, I do research, and a lot of it, to better understand and recognize the needs of HR and organizational leaders like you so that we can continually improve our insights and services to help customers achieve their goals. And that's really where all of this started. Honestly, at the onset of this pandemic, it was clear to us that the employer-employee relationship would be changing, that in some ways all of the existing research and experience we had relied on just might not be as relevant in this fundamentally changed world. And so like so many others, while we weren't sure at the time what that would look like, short-term or long-term, we knew that we really wanted to help in whatever way we could. And that's why we kicked off this research project. We wanted to better understand what employees need right now as a result of this crazy time, and especially what can employers do to help. And so as we were preparing our report, I came across this quote from the American Psychological Association, and it literally stopped me in my tracks. The coronavirus pandemic is an epidemiological and psychological crisis. The enormity of living in isolation, changes in our daily lives, job loss, financial hardship, and grief over the death of loved ones has the potential to affect the mental health and well-being of many. And so for me, this was hard to read because it was such a stark, direct summation of the complex emotions that I think all of us have been feeling while trying to navigate this crisis, feelings that are often really difficult to put into words. But what was even more jarring for me was taking this statement and contextualizing it with what I've been hearing is true in the employee experience for so many right now. And while some employers have definitely stepped up, and this has been an amazing way that they've given back to their people, many continue to struggle with how to support them. And in fact, months into the pandemic, there was a study released that found that 40% of people said they hadn't even had anybody ask them how they were doing. And so that's part of what set us off to do this. We wanted to help, but we also wanted to do that by asking different kinds of workers how they were doing. We knew that this was a need, and not at the surface level, but on a deeper level that would help us see the nuances of the psychological impact of this experience. So we talked to about 500 employed workers. We specifically went to workers who were still employed, knowing that there's a ton of other challenges that those unemployed workers are dealing with, but we really wanted this to focus on people who were currently working. This included a majority of which were employed full-time, and then some part-time workers as well. And then we went to a variety of different organization sizes, generally larger organizations, though, as you can see here, and talked to a lot of different levels within the organization. That was really important to us, too, because we felt like those different employees at different levels would likely be having different experiences and needs. From there, we did census balance to ensure that this was a nationally representative sample for age and gender. And that helped us just feel really good about this being a representative sample of U.S. workers. We also wanted to make sure that it was reflective of all of the crazy changes that everybody is going through. And so as you can see here, that included both where they were working. So we had about 60% who were working off-site, another 34% who were working on-site in a co-located environment, and then 7% who were in another arrangement. And then especially too, we wanted to really look at what were some of the different changes that they had been through. And so this was, some workers had multiple changes that they had been through, but basically this helped us get a better glimpse into what kinds of disruptions were they living through. And so as you can see, the most common was that they had to suddenly start working from home. There were also people who had experienced reductions in their hours, reductions in pay, some people who were even hired because of this. So really a variety of different things going on here. But the net of it, I would say, is only 29% of the sample said that they hadn't really changed as a result of this. So those could have been essential workers who continued to report on site. Nothing really changed there. That would probably be the most likely example. So what did we hear from them? I want to start first off with employee emotions. We're going to go through a few different areas in terms of what we heard from them. And basically starting with emotions, because I think this is the one that all of us are feeling so strongly right now. And part of that's because today that separation between work and personal life isn't just blurred, it's non-existent. And that's having a significant impact on an employee's emotional health. So as a result, a lot of employers have become really aware of the importance of employee mental and emotional health, but not all know what to do about it. And so that's really where the issue is. And so for us, we thought, well, let's look into that and see what can we learn about typical employees that we can help organizations see. And so what we are seeing here is that this is basically a crisis that represents a defining moment in the employee experience. And so paying attention to and supporting the emotional health of people is important from a continuity standpoint, certainly. But I also want to walk away with this message of it's the right thing to do for any organization that genuinely values their people. And we're seeing that this is really that kind of make it or break it moment where organizations are either understanding that and doing the best they can to tap into that, or others who maybe are not. And we're seeing downstream impact of that as well. When it came to what we really explored with this in terms of how we looked at employee emotion, we measured two different core dimensions of emotion. The first is valence, which is the intensity of a positive or negative feeling. And then the second is activation, which is the amount of physical energy associated with the emotion itself. I know this is a little bit heavy, so I want to take a minute to kind of break this down further to help explain it. And so basically, valence and activation are often correlated, but they're not the same. So for example, let's think about anger and sadness and how they can feel equally and intensely bad in terms of valence, but anger is high in activation. It's agitating and it makes you want to act. It takes a lot of energy. But by contrast, sadness is considered low in activation. It's wearying and makes you want to withdraw and just kind of, it's a much more down feeling. We know, though, that not all feelings are either high or low, positive or negative, and so we account for the fact that experiences can feel ambivalent too, meaning that they can be both positive and negative emotions, kind of a blend of the two. When we were evaluating activation, we asked people how strongly they felt the presence of 4 core emotions in their life, which we categorize as energized, which would be something like excited, delighted, motivated, inspired. Peaceful, which is more calmness, tranquility, relaxed, comfortable, and secure. Agitation, so basically, are they frustrated, angry, disgusted, stressed, anxious, afraid, or weary? That's really where those feelings like disappointment and discouragement, tiredness, even depression and feeling overwhelmed and anxious can come into play. And in our analysis, it was really interesting because we noted that there are fundamental signals of resiliency already present. And that's the good news. So despite the challenges of life today, specifically, we found that positive valence, low activated emotions are the predominant feelings being expressed about life overall right now. Many people also reported having a high mix of low and high activated feelings, which further just, I think, reinforces the continual emotional churn that people are feeling right now in the midst of trying to work through this crisis. The trend toward positive valence was especially notable because 81% reported feeling good at all about their current life situation versus 22% who reported feeling bad at all. We saw even greater distinction when we looked at this through several different segments, including feeling good at all was much more likely among married people or people who are living with a partner versus their single counterparts. We also saw that workers who were still reporting on-site to their jobs had a higher degree of positive valence than those who were not. And when we asked them why they were feeling good at all, we really wanted to tap into that positivity side of things. And we saw several common themes that really rose to the top, including gratitude for what they do have, the ability to still support their families, and their ability to still meet basic needs. I included a few verbatim comments and quotes that we collected, in part because personally, I loved being able to explore this component of the research, and it left me feeling more hopeful about the potential silver linings that people are finding in this. But here's what I think is actually really cool. it's not all good news. It's not like it's this, overwhelmingly positive, unrealistic positivity is going on in the world. People are still really realistic. And so that's what we see here in this question, where we ask people about the impact overall, positive versus negative, in their life as a result of COVID-19. And the reason why it's important that we saw realism come through is because that's really a cornerstone of resiliency. People can appreciate the positive, which is important from this, but they're also realistic about the negative impact that it's had on them overall. And so when we asked them how their life had been impacted, most workers unsurprisingly agreed that they had been negatively impacted, almost 70%. Interestingly, respondents who were still working on-site for their employer reported more of a positive impact than those working off-site. Some of that could definitely be a result of some of that hero pay, some of the additional stability that maybe they feel like they have as a result of being still co-located. But the variation among that segment was really interesting, especially when we think about how there's a renewed push to keep people who maybe were temporarily moved remote permanently, or just the longer this goes on, more and more remote time. So interesting to keep an eye on that. That's definitely something we'll want to keep a pulse on in the future as we continue to evaluate these feelings. So now that you better understand kind of the 30,000-foot level of the emotions employees are feeling, we wanted to dig a little bit more granularly into some of the other opinions that they expressed. Specifically here, we want to tap into employee concerns and outlook. We know that they're positive overall. We know that they're realistic overall, but what's really on their minds about what they think is going to happen? Basically, what we saw was that the fears that are taking precedence are really rooted more in the physical and emotional wellness that they have versus the financial needs that they have. Interestingly, I thought that the health and emotional well-being of their communities were of most concern to people, above even the physical health of their own families and themselves. This is not typical, I would say, in the research that we do. Typically, people tend to be much more focused on their immediate circle. And so seeing this greater awareness of impact to the community was honestly kind of refreshing for me. Of less concern were those financial needs, such as potential job loss and the ability to provide for their families and pay bills. So what's interesting is that there was a few different things that came out when we explored this through other segments. And first and foremost, I would say, despite the inherent risk that workers take when they report to on-site jobs, there was really relatively little distinction in the rankings for their fears and their concerns when comparing them with their off-site counterparts. I say that with the exception of concern regarding the ability to buy what was needed for them. Several other notable variations that we saw included generational differences. So we saw that Gen Z and millennials were typically more concerned than other generations about things like their ability to buy basic needs, job loss, and the ability to pay their bills. We also saw an indication that race impacts area and level of concern, also particularly when viewing those who classify as Black or African American or Hispanic, where concern was notably higher for the health of their communities than the other segments evaluated, even more above and beyond from what we saw in the general population. And so while it's impossible to predict exactly how long the recovery will take, we did want to ask that of people and try to see what are they expecting. And most respondents, I would say, appear to understand that it's not going to be quickly. We see more of that realism coming through. And most agree that we're months, if not years out, with a few months to about a year being the most commonly held belief. In general, I would say that age extended the anticipated time to recover, except for when it came to millennials and Gen Z, who were much more likely to believe resolution would come more quickly. 37% anticipate recovery within a few months. Behavioral scientists have long regarded resiliency, or a person's ability to recover quickly from difficulty, is a key to weathering crisis effectively. And while resiliency can be learned and nurtured over time, we also know that there are certain attitudes and behaviors that, when you express them, tend to indicate greater levels of resiliency. And one of these attitudes is positivity. And so that's why we dug into that a little bit more. We asked respondents how positive they were about the future, and saw that about 68% agree that they feel positively about the future, and just 13% disagree. This positivity and honestly optimism is a promising indication to me that despite the inherent stress of life today, strong levels of resiliency are still present. In addition, I would note that positivity was particularly high among executive level respondents, with 79% feeling positive about the future. That's almost 11% higher than the general population. So given that executives often act as the guiding voice for the organization, I think that this really signals an opportunity for them to step up and actively and routinely project this confidence for employees to just help align them around that shared vision for the future and to boost overall morale. All right, so at the start of this webcast, I mentioned that one of our key intentions was to better understand what we could all do better for our employees to help them to an eventual recovery. And so to better understand what those needs were, we tapped into a few different common theories of social psychology. I promise not to get too heavy into this stuff, but I do need to take a few minutes up front to just walk through those two different philosophies to make sure we're on the same page. And so the first one probably looks a little familiar. Basically, we explored needs through the lens of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's essentially what we covered earlier when I was discussing those employee fears. Those were a lot of the different angles we tried to explore through that. But I want to just take a minute to walk back through the basics of Maslow's motivational theory to make sure we're all on the same page. And so it's been around since the 1940s. And at its most basic, I would say it basically says that people are inherently motivated to want to attain various needs that they have. And according to his theory, these needs includes physiological, safety, love and belonging, esteem and self-actualization. And the concept is often represented visually like a pyramid that you see here. There are these different hierarchical levels that indicate level of importance for each of the needs. And initially, most people thought that each lower level needed to be met before you could move on to a higher level. But increasingly, people are questioning that. And actually, what we're realizing is that people will dictate the order of the needs that they need to have fulfilled in the order of what's most important to them. So they don't necessarily have to follow that linear progression. Rather, it's just whatever is most important to that individual at the time takes precedence. And the reason why that matters is because of what we're living in today. So while most people today will continue to debate the relevancy of Maslow's theory, people will generally concede that the basic premise is true. Under typical circumstances, if a person's basic needs aren't met, it's hard for them to focus on much else. And that's why this is so relevant right now, because in times of crisis, our biological instincts actually take over. And we're engineered to focus first on those basic needs. So things like food, water, security, and anything else that anybody's been hoarding lately. But that doesn't mean that those other needs aren't also important. They just aren't what our brain is triggering as most important. And so as the world tries to cope with social restriction and stress and anxiety and everything that comes along with this, meeting those psychological and self-fulfillment needs is more important than ever, but our brains might not be realizing it. And so there are many different behaviors and circumstances that impact these higher level needs. And we wanted to get a better pulse on how effectively is that happening, or is everybody still kind of stuck down at the bottom of the pyramid? And so what we did was we explored categories like connection to their peers and leaders, emotional support strategies, growth and development opportunities, and even their own perceptions regarding their autonomy, goal alignment, and individual sense of belonging and self-esteem, so that we could really get a well-rounded exploration of what are all of those different types of needs and motivations that employees have right now. But we didn't just rely on Maslow's theory for this study. As I said, we tapped into a couple of different types of motivational theory, and one of them was what you see here on screen. In an earlier research project of ours at ITA Group, we identified that there are 3 factors that, when effectively nurtured for employees, lead to more engaged, motivated workers. And we call this the psychological benefit framework. It taps into the principles of social psychology to really evaluate employee engagement specifically and identify specific actions that organizations can take to better meet the needs of their unique employee base. So while that research was completed in a pre-COVID-19 world, we believe that the principles still remain incredibly relevant to today's situation. And they include 3 different types of psychological benefits: functional benefits, emotional benefits, and identity benefits. To date in this research, we've really been focusing more on the category of emotional benefits, or how do I feel about work right now? And that's not to say that it's not important, but there are other ones, the identity benefits, that actually are proven to be even more important. And so while they undeniably impact employee engagement, satisfaction, and advocacy, it's actually those identity benefits, which you see in orange, which are found to be the single most important driver of outcomes like employee engagement, retention, and advocacy. The identity benefits help evaluate how a person believes that their job defines them and explores emotions like self-esteem, pride, and inclusivity. Now, because an eventual return to work is going to focus on employee engagement, satisfaction, and advocacy, we know that they're core to recovery. We know that that's what's needed. And so we expanded our research to include an analysis of the identity benefits in addition to the emotional benefits, and of course, Maslow's needs as well. When we were exploring identity benefits, the best way to get at that are by exploring questions like, what level of connection do employees feel to the organization? What level of support do employees feel like they're receiving from leadership? And what level of alignment and trust do they feel is present in the organization? So after we blended all of these different theories and cross-analyzed everything, what were the key takeaways? Well, first, let's start with what's going well. I would say, understandably, the focus for many organizations during this time has been physical health and safety, and so it's not surprising that employees are generally pretty happy with those efforts and feeling pretty good. In addition, I would say that we've seen a lot of focus on organizations trying to find ways to align their people to common goals and expectations to stabilize operations. We know this has been incredibly disruptive for most companies, and so they've been very focused on how do we maintain organizational stability as a result. And so it's pretty clear through the findings that employees do believe that expectations are pretty clear, and they're pretty clear on their own goals. So I would say that all of those efforts are working. There's a few things that could be better, though. So interestingly, while employees seem to have a really good grasp on overall expectations and their own goals, we saw a disconnect crop up in terms of the support and communication they're looking for from leaders. Basically, they're being communicated to effectively, but just not really the way that they want to be. And so what they're looking for, they're not just high-level goals and process. They're looking to emotionally connect. And they're expressing that need for transparent, authentic, and especially timely communication from their leaders and the larger organization. In our analysis, there were some interesting trends as it relates to a respondent's level in the organization with this particular topic. Basically, what we saw was high-level leadership generally feels very connected, and lower level generally feels kind of connected, and the middle level management are especially disconnected. So there's this gap happening to be mindful of. The other thing that I would highlight here is that there was a clearly expressed need for more acknowledgement of personal contribution at the individual level. This experience has rattled people. Everybody is trying to stay productive and do a good job despite a wide variety of different circumstances that people are dealing with. And it has let loose this surge of fear and concern about their personal value, the acceptability of their own productivity levels, and they're starting to compare themselves to others, even if they're not fair comparisons. For example, one person who has children at home that they're also trying to educate can't fairly compare themselves and their own output to somebody who doesn't have those same challenges. There's so many different variables at play, but what's happening is they're comparing themselves to each other, and it's impacting everybody's self-esteem levels. And so as a result, people are craving individual acknowledgement of their contribution to alleviate those fears. But what's interesting is it's not as simple as just recognition. In fact, in addition to a need for recognition and appreciation, they're looking for things like what you see here on screen. So they're looking to know that they personally contribute to the organization. They're looking for validation of their opinion. Sometimes it's nice to just be asked what your thoughts are. And they're really looking for more inspiration from their leadership. They don't feel like their leaders are helping them be enthusiastic about the future. And the reason why all of this is important is because positive reinforcement has been shown to boost resiliency, positivity, and motivation. And we know that these behaviors and attitudes are so critical to the eventual recovery of everything post-crisis. And so that's why, I would say these are key areas for us to really tap into that we've unearthed through this research as an opportunity. So, while there are a lot of unknowns that remain regarding recovery and long-term implications of the pandemic, one thing is certain that I have taken away from this: how employers have responded will represent a defining moment in the employee experience for each of their workers. But despite the mental and emotional toll this crisis has taken on people, I want to end this message with hope and encouragement and some practical ideas for how you can use this information to support your people now and into the recovery period. The first point I'd raise here is the good news that realism and resiliency are already apparent. People are leaning into those attitudes and emotions that we know are key to that and to a successful recovery and organizational operational stability. They're expressing gratitude, they're maintaining positivity, and they're still staying realistic without being fatalistic about what the future can hold. Few ideas for how you can help support them with this. So first and foremost, I would say you got to keep a pulse on the emotions of your people, whether they're on site, returning to work, continuing to work off site, or somewhere in between. I've heard the saying recently that in this crisis, we're all weathering the same boat, but we're all weathering the same storm, but we're equipped with different boats. And I think that that is so interesting and really points to me the importance of taking an individualized approach to outreach for your people. I know that that's hard when we have a large, complex organization that we're trying to help, but this is a very personally, individually affecting crisis that people are working through. So my point here is make sure that you're staying on top of how a person feels now and a week from now, because those emotions can change so quickly. I would say definitely encourage your leaders to have those authentic and honest discussions with their people about the emotions that they're dealing with. That's what people are looking for right now, is just more transparency, more honesty, more authenticity. It's especially important that they seek to really understand those individual experiences or those boats that those people are in, because we've seen that a lot of different factors, whether that's race or job status or generation or home environment, all of those things can impact those emotions as well. As you start to think about the process of returning to work, I'd keep in mind too that those emotions are going to be fluctuating as well. They might shift back to basic needs like safety and health concerns, which can feel like a step backwards for people who may have been able to focus on their higher level psychological needs in the new normal they were in at home. But it's also positive. It's also possible that some of those sources that they've found for positivity, things like reduced commute time and more ability to spend time with their family, they won't have those to tap into anymore, and those will be disrupted. And so overall, I just say things are looking good. Overall, people are hanging in there, but expect that emotional volatility can certainly crop up again as we continue to work through this recovery process. And just at the end of the day, rely on your leaders to be that frontline support for your people. They shouldn't need to bear the entire weight of employee listening, though. As an organization, I would encourage you to leverage other tactics like pulse surveying and focus groups to try to gather additional insight into your people and how they're faring. Because there's one thing this has taught us, it's that no organization is exactly alike. So the second point that I would have you walk away with is, it was refreshing to me to see that needs are generally consistent, and that's not something we always see in research. But interestingly, despite the wide variety of the unique circumstances and individual needs, there's a notable degree of consistency in our findings at the highest level that really underscores the importance of key things like focusing on fundamental human needs like connection, autonomy, and empowerment, so that you can really support those strong, resilient behaviors that we're already seeing take root. So while all workers will benefit when these needs are supported, the research revealed that those needs are especially pronounced for workers who are off-site right now. So while many have been working remotely for months, ensure that your people really still understand your expectations for them, and especially where inherent flexibility exists for them. Demonstrating that you trust them without reservation is really going to help ease the pressure that they feel, even if that's self-imposed. I know it's hard, but right now connecting with peers, leaders, and the company brand itself are so important. And one way that you as a leader can support this human need for your people is with things like routine video-based leadership communications that just confirm company priorities or values, or even trying to find ways that you can still facilitate social and special interest group connections through things like virtual meetups and collaboration tools. Really look for those opportunities to be able to keep people connected even though they're apart. And finally, I'd say, well, inherently people often view recovery as this return to what we once knew. Our data points to heightened awareness that certain parts of life might not. So as such, I think that employees are eager for direction and guidance, and they're likely pretty impressionable right now. So as you recover together, I would encourage you to view this as a unique opportunity to align, or maybe realign, on how work gets done. What does living your company values really look like? Or are there things that you've adopted during this time that you want to keep? All of those things are really good, healthy, viable conversations to be having. And then the final point I would say is, room for improvement still exists. This is still hard. It's hard for everyone. So employees need your continued support to enhance their motivation. Physical health, safety, and comfort have all been top of mind for organizations, and I totally understand why. And employees are pretty satisfied with that, so that's good. But they're looking for more acknowledgement, inspiration, and honestly, just clearer, more authentic communication to help sustain them and carry them through. They've voiced a need for improved recognition and reinforcement of their personal values. And while added pay has been a way that some companies are validating the work for some people who remain on site, I think that there's still broad room for improvement, whether that's finding ways to meaningfully verbalize recognition, or maybe sending more formalized written recognition. But what we're seeing is that there's this distinct need, particularly among those workers who are not co-located, where they're struggling to connect with peers and leaders and looking for this validation of their work. As you look toward recovery, I'd say, consider alternative or adjusted recognition strategies that you can implement that are really specific to the behaviors are important right now to maintaining organizational stabilization or reinforcing your company values and culture. Given the magnitude of this experience, continued support for employees' mental and emotional well-being is going to continue to stay top of mind as well. There's a wide variety of ways that you can provide virtual and on-site options to help with stress management, emotional resiliency, and overall well-being. But it can be particularly effective to offer these types of things up to your people ongoing. I think that they'll expect it long into the future. And that will continue to be an expectation into the coming years. The final point I would raise is just, as people are looking to align towards shared goals and objectives, maybe consider creating near-term goals, such as milestones to achieve over the next 30, 60, 90 days that are designed to really align and celebrate organizational progress toward recovery. By having some of these smaller, more tactical goals, it can help people really lock in on how they're working together, plus give you that added bonus of things to celebrate along the way, which is really what people are looking for in terms of that validation that things will be all right. And with that, I really am going to wrap up with the rundown of our research. I encourage you to check out the full report, which you can access at the link here on screen to see our full findings. As always, I hope that you've enjoyed this, learned something new, taken a few nuggets back with you. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. I love talking about the research. I could talk about it for hours on end. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to follow up with you at that point. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you again so much for your time. I hope this has been helpful. Have a great day.